Good morning. I am so excited to be here. My name is Vonshelle Beneby, as it says there. I am the assistant minister at New Smyrna Beach United Church of Christ, but my full-time career is with Vitas Healthcare as a hospice chaplain. So just want to also say thank you so much for continuing to open up the space for us at Vitas. We from time to time we did a year-long grief support group here, so thank you so much for that. Also, I have to say a big thank you because I'm getting married here, so appreciate that. Appreciate the space, and as always, the hospitality. So let us go to God in prayer. Lovely and gracious God, I thank you so much for the beauty of this day, the opportunity to be with New Church family and just to worship with them. But more importantly, the opportunity to come together as one, to hear what you want your people to hear. May the words I say, may they not be my words, but instead your words that are pleasing and acceptable to you. Amen. So recently I heard a young man describe what he was seeing and experiencing. He explained how the environment is just slowly slipping away, how poverty is causing dissension, and our nation using people's social and economic statuses to determine who is worthy. How he keeps seeing injustices of this world, and he can't help but wonder, what have we become as a nation? When we freely continue to accept what is wrong, when we freely continue to accept what is hurtful and unacceptable behaviors. This young man was getting tired of seeing a mother cry about the death of her child. How picketing turns to fighting, which then turns to rioting. How people are judged on their appearances, stereotypes and misperceptions, and the prejudices of this world is filled in people's heart. So this young man repeatedly proclaims only love can conquer hate. Love for one another is the answer. And through it all, as I continued to listen to this young man, I kept hearing the message of hope. This young man first professed these words in 1971. And many of us heard his heart's cry as he sang, "There's got to be a way to find some loving here today. What's going on?" Yes, that was Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye proclaimed over and over and over that love is how things will get better. Ironically, hearing this song 45 years later, the words still ring true today. While listening to the song, I thought of wars and the killings that are still happening, not only in our nation, but also worldwide. And yet, there is a threat of another war to come. I thought of literally the countless mothers and fathers and family and friends who are crying today because they feel that their loved one has just died way too soon. And they feel that emptiness that dwells within them. Our leaders, those elected locally as well as nationally, speaking words of divisiveness and using their words to attack others. And while we just participated in Volusia Pride, after hearing Marvin Gaye's song, I could not help but remember the massacre at Pulse nightclub. And more recently, the so many people that were innocently killed while in Las Vegas just enjoying a concert. I am reminded of the youth, specifically our LGBT youth, who feel so helpless and sad and lost that now the rise of suicide or the attempts of suicide is occurring. The hopelessness that they feel. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Philando Castile, whose death was made public because it was being videotaped as he died in the car with his girlfriend. And these are just a few. The shootings of police officers who ironically were killed trying to protect the people who were being peaceful. I think of the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement to now More Lives Matter, to where I hope one day we come to understand that all lives matter. And then I think of Heather Danielle Heyer. Heather was a 32-year-old woman who was greeted by a large, angry crowd of the alt-right neo-Nazis and others who supported the white supremacy groups. She was later killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, where 19 people were injured. In the midst of her death and the chaos, people are holding torches and baseball bats, and their chants filled the air as they rattled out so loudly, "Blood and soil. Blood and soil. You will not replace us," meaning our Jewish sisters and brothers will not take our country. The neo-Nazi chants of then and even today for what they believe is the need for racial purity. And then a few days later, after her death and the 19 people were injured, they immediately rallied and planned what just happened, which was the protest in Gainesville. As a hospice chaplain, I have also noticed the increase of patients and their caregivers and their family members boldly saying, "I don't want any person of color taking care of my loved one or taking care of me. I don't want any person of color giving me my medication, giving me my bath. Keep them away." I think about the hundreds to thousands of people who have nowhere to sleep. They're struggling to figure out how they could even eat a meal or any kind of food. And yet how society doesn't even see them or acknowledge them and just turn their heads. And how the names Matthew, Harvey, Irma, Maria, how it takes on a whole different meaning now. Instead, it means destruction and devastation and homelessness and powerlessness. So what is going on? While we see these events and circumstances, most of us actually choose not to be blind to them. Most of us actually choose to respond through prayer, by holding them, these events and these situations in our hearts, and then to be of service, to have the opportunity for those conversations on race and culture and our religious differences and anything that divides us. But yet our scripture lesson this morning tells us that perhaps Marvin Gaye did have it right when he said love. We need love. We have got to bring some loving here this day. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Pharisees are described as they're actually marveling at how Jesus was able to completely silence the Sadducees. So you have to understand that the Sadducees, they only accepted the written law of Moses as being the law, as being right, the authority. And so they denied many of the doctrines held by these other political and religious groups, but especially by Jesus. So even though they knew of Jesus and they had the awareness of Jesus, they were blind to Jesus. But Jesus was able to completely silence them and baffle them. And so the Pharisees, the other political party, were mainly comprised of what was considered the common everyday person. So one of them, we don't know if this person was elected or if he took it upon himself, said, "I'm going to talk to him. I bet I can get him." Now, isn't there always one in the crowd who thinks they know better? And this one said, "I can do it." He was able to silence this group, but I'll get him. So he goes up to Jesus and he approaches him and he says, "So, Master," and again, we see that as kind of a condescending term from this particular Pharisee. He says, Well, Master, what is the greatest commandment of law? Jesus paused for a moment and said, well, love. Love is what God commands. But then he says something that is often overlooked. Because the next thing he said is, love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And so the Pharisee immediately goes to the second commandment. Like, oh, okay, let me try again. So what would you say is the second great commandment? Jesus says, well, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So just in that brief interaction, Jesus is telling the Pharisees and everyone that, everything that we say and do is centered around one action: love. And to love God is to understand that God's love and mercy and compassion is unconditional for us. It's without limits. It's without boundaries. To love God with our heart, our soul, and our mind is to bring our whole selves to God. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jesus' response was, well, love God with your heart. Jesus goes on to say your heart, your soul, your mind, meaning your whole self, your whole being. Love God with all of you. Because while we do that in our loving of God, we take on God's love that's unconditional and abundant. To know that because of God's love for us, we can boldly come in the presence of God. We tend to get caught up in these things and situations and circumstances that we feel most often that we cannot just simply be in the presence of God. But God is saying, come as you are with all of your thoughts, all of your feelings. Come, for I am here. Then Jesus goes on to say with the second great commandment, is that now that you understand God's love and compassion, be an expression of that for others. For it's one thing to know God loves us and receives us, but Jesus says you got to do the next thing. You have to be the expression of that. For that is what it truly means to love your neighbors as yourself. Our words and our actions are to express God's love. We are to model what it means to be an extension of God's love. When people see you, what and who do you think they see? Do they see you as a person who is modeling the expression of God's love? You see, to be in relationship with one another is to understand that we all come from one Creator, one source. Therefore, the relationship that we are in with each other and together is not a happenstance or coincidence. It's a divine order. And that regardless of our religious beliefs, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of our socioeconomic statuses, you are my sister and you are my brothers. Therefore, anything I say to you, if I'm modeling the expression of love, will be from the intent of love, compassion, mercy, justice, hope. But more importantly, if I say something to you that harms you, I'm harming myself because we are connected. We are one because we all come from that one source. So to harm others is to harm my own brother and my own sister. But yet, that first great command, love God with our heart, our soul, and our mind. We have to be willing to honestly and completely open ourselves up before God and to examine what is an anchor in my life. What is a barrier that is stopping me or preventing me from bringing my whole self to God? My mind, my soul, my heart. What is it that I just can't seem to get past? To truly bring our whole selves to God, we have to be willing to look at those walls, to look at those barriers, to look at those anchors, to look at those things that stand as the wall or the barrier between me and God. What is that? And we have to be willing to honestly do that. What is it that stops us from fully living out what it means to embrace and receive God's love? What is it that makes it difficult for me to bring my whole self to God because I may feel that, I'm just not that beloved child of God? What is it that stops me or us from claiming that, from bringing my heart, my soul, and my mind? Because Jesus is the living example of the affirmation that we should live daily. And that affirmation is we are free. We're free. Because of the life and the death and the resurrection, we are truly free. We are free from our past so we can enjoy the present and then fully embrace the future. But yet I'm also mindful, whether it's my life or the lives of others, that people have a way of just assigning traits to us and putting us in these categories or boxes. Cute, ugly. Smart, dumb. Skinny, fat. Society has a way of saying, this is who you are. I will tell you who you are, rather than you finding out for yourself. And whether we are young to our experiences we have as we continue to grow and mature, we keep getting these traits, these assignments, these things. And these things can actually stop us or block us from going into the fullness of God and bringing ourselves to God, because we carry them thinking, I just can't. And so intentionally or unintentionally, people, as they tell us who they think we are, or we assign to our own selves, we go on with these labels, these traits. And for some of us, we carry them for a moment. For some of us, we have been carrying these for decades. Lifelong for a lot of us. And Jesus is saying clearly, love the Lord your God fully. To love the Lord your God fully means you have to drop those things that serve as an anchor. That may even mean dropping some of your relationships, dropping some of your friendships, dropping, and I will even say, family. Sometimes you got to drop and put aside those things that stop you from being able to be the expression and the fullness of God, so you can go fully into God. So when you hear those things, those traits, those labels, from this day forward, claim or reclaim your identity, who you are as a child of God. For those labels, those traits, they are not you. They're not you. And that's really what Jesus was saying when he says, when you come fully before God, you come before God understanding how God sees you as the beloved child of God. You're not those things that those people say you are. You are who God says you are. You are a beloved child of God. You say I'm worthless. God's love says I'm worthy. You say I'm useless. God's love says you are more powerful than any and everything, because I created you in my image. You say I am nothing. God says you are everything, because I love you just the way you are. Those things that people say you are not true. Why are you still carrying that? Why are you still holding that? Don't let these labels define who you are. So think of those labels that you carry. You still carry. Lost. Forgotten. Sick. Meaningless. Abandoned. Hurt. Unlovable. Useless. Think of all of those labels, and some of them are layers upon layers upon layers, that they have become this big weight and burden that you now carry because you're carrying all those labels. So think of all of those labels and stand firm from this point on and hear this, that beloved, you are free. Claim your freedom. Claim your new identity. Boldly claim who you are as a beloved child of God, standing boldly before God with your whole self. Understand what it means to truly embrace and receive God's love. And from this point on, when you walk with the authority of who you are. You walk with your new identity. You walk with the understanding that as a beloved child of God, I am beautifully and wonderfully and wondrously made. That I am no longer these things that you claim to be. Instead, I take on and I reclaim my new identity. For I am whole. I am complete. But more importantly, I am loved. And now, as you go forth with that new identity, be the expression of that love to all people. Can you imagine how this world would be if we all took on that expression of God's love? Oh my gosh. We wouldn't have to rattle off Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. We wouldn't have to rattle off Pulse or anything else, because we are all living and embodying what it means to be the expression of God's love. So my sisters and my brothers, may you go forth from this day knowing that you are loved. That those things that serve as a barrier between you and God are no more. Claim your new identity so you can be and worship God with your whole heart, your soul, and your mind. Our labels truly become a weight. Our labels truly become that thing that we carry that can stop us from feeling worthy for God's love. You should have received a white index card. If you did not, raise your hand and someone will help me out, I'm sure, and get you one. As we prepare for the hymn and prepare for communion, think of that label or labels that you no longer want to own or claim. The label or labels that you believe is stopping you from coming before fully before God. And write it down. Don't think about it. Just write it down, because we tend to overthink. But just write it down. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to read it. But just write it down, and then when you come up for communion, I ask that you just place it in this basket as a sign of your release, as a sign of claiming your new identity as a beloved child of God.